This is Continuum Drag, a podcast where we watch sci-fi, fantasy, and everything in between. This week, The Stone Tape.
They must have been funny people. There was something about an exorcism once.
Exorcism?
Now, I can't approve of that. I know it's in the prayer book, but oh dear, dear.
You do mean laying a ghost?
Welcome to Continuum Drag, the podcast that will curse you if you try to erase it. I'm Luke, here with my co-host, wearing his classic Halloween costume. It's George Binks.
Oh, that's pretty... You know what? I knew you were going to have a nickname, and I was like, Jack O'Jordan. That's what I thought you were going to go with.
Jack O'Jordan, eh?
Yeah.
Well, what's real? I didn't say it. What's real?
Well, here's what's real. I came up with, I think, maybe not a more evocative title for this, but a different title. Because this what we're going to talk about is a show called The Stone Tape, or a movie called The Stone Tape. But I think it should be called Ghost Proof.
Ghost Proof?
Yeah, they say that at one point. They say Ghost Proof, and I was like, oh, that's better.
Well, you should have been there.
I should have been there. You're right. Billy, do you think it's better?
Ghost Proof?
Yeah, Ghost Proof.
No. The Stone Tape has some class to it. I think Ghost Proof sounds like it would be one of those A&E shows with ghost hunters or something
okay.
like that. You know?
That's fair. That's fair. But I noticed you didn't come up with a title. He's crapping all over Ghost Proof, but he doesn't have a title. Come on. What do you got?
I think The Stone Tape is perfect.
Oh, all right.
Well, why don't we introduce him? For our Halloween episode, we've brought in a returning guest, a spooky guest. Billy, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me back.
So when were you last on? We almost got into this before the recording started, but I wanted to ask you here, do you remember the last times you were on this podcast?
So, see, I thought I had only been on this once, but then you guys brought it to my attention. I've been on twice already. So the first time was we did a couple episodes of Earth 2, which I remember Tim Curry, amazing in it. And then the second time was it called The Wasp?
Ooh, I think it was Wasp Woman, wasn't it?
Wasp Lady or Wasp Woman? I forget what it was called.
Yeah, no, it was Wasp Woman. I had forgotten you were on that episode, yes.
Yeah, so we watched, but you know what? I don't remember quite so much the one that we watched because it was like a 90s or an 80s remake of it. Because I then went back and watched the original one from, I think it was from the 40s or 50s or something, and it was in black and white. And I much preferred that one to the one that we had actually watched.
What I remember from The Wasp Woman was it was quite bad. So that's my lasting memory.
It was really bad. Yeah.
Well, we wanted to bring you on the Halloween episode because it's my understanding you're a big horror fan.
I am. I've been doing... So I do my little Spooktober thing where the only movies I watch during October are just horror, which is, I usually watch horror quite frequently through the year, but I saved some. So I have quite a list going right now of ones that I've already knocked off. So it's one that I watched last week that I know it's getting a lot of hype is The Substance.
Oh, of course.
With Demi Moore. Demi or Demi? Remember that Seinfeld?
That's a Seinfeld.
Right? Yeah.
You never heard of a Semi truck?
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
Which I thought was quite grotesque, but
I've heard.
But too long, you know?
Oh.
It was too long.
Any highlights then? Any winners this Spooktober?
Yeah, Strange Darling. That was surprising. And Jordan, that was the one that I sent you the screenshot where in the beginning of the movie it says this was shot on, I think, a 35 millimeter film, and I got so upset that I took a picture of the TV and sent it to Jordan, and I said, no one fucking cares. Nobody cares. Only camera people care. No one else noticed the difference. You put a fucking filter on it, it's the exact same thing.
Let me ask you, so they shot in the film, how was it?
But the movie was great. But not because of how it looked. It was just a good story. I liked it.
Despite of it.
All right. Other than stepping off on a bad foot for you, it still managed to pull together.
It did, yes. But when I saw that, and I told Jordan, I was just like, I hate this already. I have a preconceived notion because I know some DOP just was like, we should definitely note in the beginning there that it's a 35 millimeter film. No fucking audience member gives a shit.
By the way, I love when you do impersonations of people that don't actually exist, but like it's always the voice like that, isn't it? I was doing that this week about someone. I'm like, and you're like, doo, 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 doo. Everyone sort of sounds like an ogre. It's wonderful. It's wonderful making fun of people.
Oh my goodness. All right, well, let's get into it. We're talking this week about the TV movie The Stone Tape, 1972 on BBC Two. It was created by a gentleman named Nigel. I'm going to mispronounce this. It's got a K in it. I'm going to say Nigel Neal, maybe. But maybe it's Keneal. Hard to say.
Probably Neil.
And I don't know if you've ever heard of him. I'd never heard of him before. But he's a fairly influential British sci-fi TV writer.
Yeah, I saw the same thing. And I felt the same way. I was like, I don't know if it's just one of those like across the pond things. So I was like, never heard of him. Or maybe it's just like a generational thing that hasn't quite, stood the test of time. We just don't know who he is anymore.
Yeah, he's got a whole series called the Quatermass series, I guess, which is like TV movies, TV shows, radio dramas. He did like maybe a dozen of them. I don't have the exact number here, but quite a few of them within this series. He also made a controversial adaptation of 1984.
Oh,
interesting.
And he has a number of just TV movies and features to his credit. Like he did a draft of Halloween 3.
Really?
Apparently he did, and apparently it was heavily rewritten. I believe the quote he had about it was, he hadn't seen the final version, but he understood that Mr. Carpenter carpenterized it to sawdust, was his exact quote.
Hold on, Billy, you're the expert on this. Is Halloween 3 the good one? Is that the one you and I both like? We're the only two people who like it better than the rest of the series?
Yes, because it's the only one. It's Season of the Witch, which is no Michael Myers at all. It's its own standalone movie, and I watch that every Halloween because it is my favorite of the Halloween series. It's so much fun and so goofy, and the acting is great, and there's some problematic stuff in it with the ages of the love interests and stuff. And it ends on such a dark note, and I'm just like, this is great. So it's curious that I wonder if this director who you said he wrote the draft of the Halloween.
He wrote the original screenplay for it, but he in his opinion, it was probably, he hasn't seen the film though, but in his opinion, they butchered his script.
I wonder if he wrote the Season of the Witch, or if he wrote what the studio wanted, which was another Michael Myers.
There's only one way to find out. Go. I'm sure the script's online somewhere. Treat yourself. I'll tell you what though. He also wrote another TV movie, Jordan, that I think is more up your alley.
What's that?
It was called The Year of the Sex Olympics.
You know what's funny? I saw that too. I saw that this morning, and I thought, what is this? And then my second thought was, I should Google it. And then my third thought was, better not.
I looked it up, actually. It honestly doesn't sound pretty good. It's based in a dystopia where, like, the ruling class keeps the underclass underfoot by, like, denying them most of their privileges. And this one year, they're, like, giving them this opportunity to have this Sex Olympics. But, like, by all accounts, it's a really good film.
You know what that actually sounds a little bit like? And I know this is terrible because I can never remember the title things. Luke, remember we watched something, the German show, and it sort of had elements of that?
Weird.
That's right, Weird. Yeah. It's sort of, I mean, there was, again, it's not the plot, but there was bits of it like that.
I'm realizing I'm mispronouncing it. It's actually the Sex Olympics, but I feel like Sex Olympics works better.
Sex Olympics is better. I approve of that title change. That one's a good
Hold on one more time. Ghost.
Is it, wait, so is it like the Hunger Games, but they just
I think the Sex Olympics has a very minor role in the actual movie, from what I can tell from the synopsis, but, like, for whatever reason, it, like, that's the title to grab your attention.
I love Billy's 30-second elevator pitch, though, in that movie.
It's a good movie.
Think of the Hunger Games, but instead of killing each other, they fuck.
I'm like, stop drilling, you hit oil.
Well, this movie, The Stone Tape, premiered on Christmas Day, 1972.
Christmas, really?
Yeah, I was looking at this. Apparently, it's I'm not sure if it's as common anymore, but there was a period of time where the BBC or BBC Two would show a original ghost story on Christmas.
That's such an, like, I mean, I get the idea of, like, what else are you doing at Christmas after you've opened presents and stuff, like, watch a movie. But it's weird that it's not, like, a Christmas-themed movie.
Maybe it's related to sort of Christmas Carol as ghosts show up, so that's what they took from that.
Maybe.
But do you want to know what else was going on in the world in December 25th, 1972, around the time of this movie came out?
Do I ever?
Yes.
Well, the day after the movie premieres, Harry Truman dies.
You know what's funny? It's one of those things where it's not actually that funny. I'm sure his family it really loved him, but it's one of those things where like certain people seem stuck in a time period. You know, Harry Truman. I'm like 1950s. I'm like, I don't know when he died. I don't know when Nixon died. You know,
December 1972. And Jordan, the day after that, another politician died. Can you guess?
So Truman died. Is it a Canadian? Is it a Canadian one?
Okay, you're getting close.
Diefenbaker.
It's Lester B. Pearson.
Lester B. Pearson.
2 world leaders back to back.
Now we have an airport.
And just for you, Jordan, 3 days before this came out, one of the continued drag series we've watched before ended. Can you guess? It's 1972. It would be December, I believe, 22nd. This comes to an end.
Quark.
The Sixth Sense.
The Sixth Sense. We all love Quark, though.
All right. And 1 month later, Jordan, January 1973, there's a continued drag movie we watched.
1973. Oh, no, The Train was a series. I'm going to say it's the one where the guy's a pilot and then things get weird.
I don't know which one that is, but no, it is A Cold Night's Death.
Oh, that one was pretty good.
It was the best one we've ever watched.
Yeah, that was good. Billy, that's a pretty good TV movie.
Okay, noted. I forget what you said, but it's...
All right, enough preamble. Let's get into it. Here's the IMDb summary for The Stone Tape. It's a bit long, so bear with me. A research team for an electronics company moves into an old Victorian house to start work on finding a new recording medium. When the team member, Jill Greeley, witnesses a ghost, team director Peter Brock decides not only to analyze the apparition, which he believes is a psychic impression trapped in a stone wall, bracket, dubbed a stone tape, end bracket, but also to experience it with terrifying results.
A couple things I'll just say. One, I don't know if they're terrifying results. But secondly, the beginning of this movie, I like the interesting opening. There's like it's sort of like black with like green images, kind of like smoky, and there's like a clicking, and you don't know what it sort of is. So I was like, oh, this is sort of interesting, and I'm not sure what it is. But for the first like 20 minutes or whatever it is, when they sort of introduce all these characters and you get the kind of lay of the land of what's happening, I could, for the first whatever it was, 10, 15 minutes, I didn't know what they actually were trying to achieve this team. Did anyone else feel that way, or was that just me? Like, I knew kind of vaguely what they were doing, but I was like, do they have to be here in this specific place? And why is this place important to what they're doing, and what specifically are they trying to do? Billy, what do you think?
So, okay. Yeah, it took a bit for this movie to get going, and it kind of opened, and I know this is just kind of like how they filmed at the time, but I kept feeling like I was in like the beginning of a Monty Python sketch and I was just waiting for it to get funny and then it just wasn't. But her whole Jane Asher's character Jill, her first introduction to us is she comes and parks in this parking lot and she looks miserable that she's there. And then these 2 trucks are backing up at the same time to her. She honks the horn. They do not hear her. And it's like that, I forget what it was, but it's like that slow moving, like the walls are coming in. And she finally freaks out and puts the car in reverse and then backs into a pile of dirt. And apparently this was such a traumatic experience that it triggered her for the entire movie. But I was like, you had plenty of time to get out of the car. And they were moving so slow, you could have walked up and been like, hey, you're going to hit me.
It is an interesting introduction to the lead character for sure. I believe a little bit later they imply she's previously had blackouts, so maybe she's had some issues. But they really are just like, she's hysterical. That's what you need to know about her off the top, and it's a bit of a rough start for your lead character.
I mean, they're just I put here just a bunch of rowdy chaps. These scientists, aren't they? They come in and they just like are like. I'm just like, how old are they supposed to be? Because they look 50, but they're acting like they're in their 20s, and they're wrestling and like ribbing each other. And then she's the only woman there, and the lead guy in this scientist thing is just coming down on her all the time because she's a woman.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a bit. They're starting a new research facility at an old British sort of manor, very Downton Abbey-esque, and they work for a company called Ryan Electronics, which has purchased the building, has been repairing it because it hasn't been used since World War II when they took it over for the war, but the U.S. military did. And essentially what they're going to be doing there is experimental research, being led by a gentleman named Peter Brock, who he's a bit of a dickhead for sure. And his whole thing is he's kind of got this subplot. It's very Succession-esque, but that he's basically got the ear and a high standing with the guy who runs Ryan Electronics, the titular Ryan. But it's not a perfect situation. Like, it's clear that Ryan like moves his like higher ups against each other to see who's going to win. But Peter has handpicked a real boys club of researchers to come together. They behave it's very Silicon Valley-esque. I was just like, oh, you could just set this in Silicon Valley and fill it with a bunch of tech bros, and this is the exact same behavior.
Yeah, it's funny that his biggest competitor within this company is a guy who is working on washing machines.
Yeah, that is very fun, especially when he appears very late in the show, and you're like, this is the man you're battling with?
My favorite character.
But essentially what they get to, and Jordan, you're not wrong, it takes about 10 minutes for them to finally get around to explaining this, but they're there to research any possible next generation recording medium that will make the magnetic tape obsolete, because they're in direct competition with Japan, which leads to nothing but constant slurs and like really very inappropriate accents.
Yeah, it's really bad. We've talked about this ad nauseum. Anytime we watch an old show, and you don't have to get that far down the line. Obviously, this is 50 years ago, almost 60 years ago, and man, it's bad. It's like the sexism is one thing, and then on top of that, there's like it's as racist as could be, and it's like it just takes you out, because I know it probably everyone at the time was just like, ha ha ha, I get it, we all like chuckling about it, but now when you're watching it and today, it's a real bad sore thumb.
Yeah, I wrote 3 instances down where there was just blatant racism, but in that first introductory bit, they're competing with Japan, and they use the slur like just very liberally there, and like, oh, this is a bad start. This is a bad start.
You really know the time and place of this, because there's also a subplot where our main character Jill Greeley and her boss Peter Brock, it's revealed very early on that they're cheating on his wife together, but like it's cool. Like it's cool. He of course he's cheating with his wife, and like he's always just like, you keep trying to break me up with my wife. I'm not gonna leave her for you. Stop trying.
Well, it is funny because at first, like, they sort of have a couple conversations. I was like, oh, they seem pretty chummy. Then, Luke, you're right. They reveal he's having an affair with her, and then later on, apropos of nothing, after he's been to his secretary, they allude to that he also slept with his secretary, and you're like, oh, because we as a viewer need to know he's a real man's man, I guess. He's a ladies' man. He's a guy about town, and I don't know if it A, added anything to his character, or B, more importantly, added anything to the story. It's like, okay, it's not like the affair had anything to do with the story, other than they may have a closer connection than other characters, I suppose. But more importantly for this guy, Peter, who you really think is going to be the main character, but you're right, it is Jill. He has a goatee and a good head of hair, but it's peculiar at all times. It looks like he's like in witness protection, doesn't it? Like, it looks like he's in disguise.
What?
Dude, his everything. I was just like, I was looking at him. I'm like, is this real? Is this goatee and hair real? Like, he looked like he just threw it on before they started filming.
I guess when you're thinking in comparison to everybody else who's there, he does sort of stand out. But also, I did not pick up on that subplot at all, that they were a thing.
Oh, really?
I knew that he was pretty handsy with her in the first 20 minutes, but I did not get a romantic thing at all between them in the entire movie. So was it blatantly pointed out, or is this...
He does use it against her when initially he's denying the concept of the hauntings. He uses it against her by like pointing out she's used tactics in the past to try to like gaslight him into leaving his wife. Like, So he initially denies that by being like, this is just you. You're always hysterical. You're always trying to find some way of getting me to leave my wife for you. It's not like dwelled upon. Like, it's treated very matter of fact and casual. Like, of course, this guy has a mistress he's having an affair with who he's not going to leave his wife for. So they don't talk about it a ton, but it's just dropped in dialogue.
Luke, you make a good point. That's the thing. Because it's the way it's treated, I think, Billy, that's how you missed it. It's not like a reveal at all. It's almost in any time he has a phone call and he's speaking to his wife at home and he'll be like, oh, what are the kids up to? And she'll like have to like leave the room. It's left more like that. So you're right, Luke. It's just like, it's just a character coloring of some kind.
Well, I felt like it was just like, well, we all know everyone is having an affair in the 70s. Like, they're just at home. Everyone's like, that's like me and my mistress. Like, it was done in a way where it's just like as if the viewers at home are going to be like, I recognize that. That happens to me all the time.
Yeah. I personally, it did not endear him to me too well, you know?
I think that's the point, though.
I did like that he cared a lot about the horse in his first conversation with his wife. He was like, "How's what's their name?" And I was like, "Wait, is he talking about his kids?" And then he said he was talking about a horse, and I was like, "Oh, that's nice. How does he not know the horse's name?"
That is a good point. I forgot about that subplot. He keeps getting calls to his wife, and he's always asking about that horse, and it never ends. There's no like resolution.
He cares more about that horse than he does about his kids, because he's like, he asks about the horse and then just, okay, give my love to the kids, and it's just like one off. Like, he doesn't give a shit about the kids at all.
What it should have been is at the very end of the movie, the last shot is you just see a horse in a field, and then it keeps punching in, and then it just on its eyeball with dun dun dun, and then the credits. You're like, oh, it was the horse, I guess.
I mean, I want to move on past the introduction, but I do want to bring up, since you brought up the horse as a like weird thing that happened that had no real reason, just was kind of there. In that opening, when they're all arriving at the manor to start the research facility, the boys open up they pull into this like hatchback. They open the hatchback and they pull a giant alien mascot out that's like looks insane.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is this? Is this going to come back? This like green alien mascot for Ryan Electronics never comes back, but they do a huge sequence where they have this man dressed as an alien.
They're just clowning around.
It was just so weird. They're just a bunch of rowdy chaps, you know?
All right, we'll move on now. Roy Collinson, he's sort of the other major character in this. He's been in charge of setting up this new office research facility, and it's all gone well with the exception of the computer data storage room. This is where Jill Greeley's supposed to be like involved with because she's their computer programmer, so she needs a lot of data storage. But they were going to set it up in this huge old stone room with this stone staircase that goes to nowhere. But the workers have been giving them a hard time of finishing it. They're kind of refusing to work in the room. Collinson has also discovered in going through paperwork that the room has some more bad news. A section of it predates the building of the manor, which happened in the 1880s, and appears to be over 1,000 years old. So he thinks they probably have to report it to some sort of conservation society or they'll get in trouble. But his boss, of course, Peter, is just like, keep it to yourself. If we get people in here, they're going to interrupt our research. I want to keep this quiet. And I guess really it's his first like initial sin that like begins the haunting.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. That is what it is. It's you get a sense right off the bat that, oh, he'll bend the rules and do what he needs to justify the end result.
And it's funny that you see this a lot in UK content because it's that bureaucracy, red tape that everyone has to deal with, the council and stuff like that, you know? Like, so they're just like, oh, if anyone finds out about this, they'll shut us down. And then everybody can kind of relate to that, which I thought was kind of funny.
And it's in this room that we get the first haunting. Essentially, everyone leaves and leaves Jill alone with her where her data storage is going to be. And she sees a maid, an old-timey maid materializes in front of her, climbs the stairs, falls off, dies, and starts screaming. And this, of course, freaks Jill out. And she goes running to tell her boss / boyfriend that she saw a ghost. And they're like kind of talking about... while they were building the room, they found some old cans of Spam from the war, and they found a letter to Santa, they thought, or Father Christmas as they called. And they open the letter up, and it says, "What I want for Christmas is please go away." And Jill's like, "This is clearly about the ghost. They're like, there's clearly a ghost in there." And Peter's just like, you know how these things start. He's like, "No, it's no ghost. We're not going to believe that." But it's a very short-lived thing because I guess he likes her enough that he takes her to town so they can ask about the ghost. They go to the local pub. Some people talk about how it was when it was there in World War II, there was like a U.S. soldier who like said he saw guppies in the room. I did not understand what that meant.
Yeah, racist alert here, because the bartender referred to like one of the soldiers as like, well, he talked funny. He was a colored boy, which I was just like, oh my goodness. But also, they talk in the bar about the dates being 1952 to 1955. What war was going on during those years?
I took it as it was just the sort of post-war years of the Americans still being there, pulling stuff out. Is what I assumed. I thought the same thing because they mentioned the 50s. I was like, well, the war. We're not talking about the Korean War here, so I thought it was just that this sort of like post-war sort of what was happening in the country.
Okay, I thought that too. And also, whatever they were eating in that bar looked fucking disgusting.
I did like that the woman who ran the bar, she's like, I used to hang out there all the time. I was a good time girl. I'm like, what does that mean?
I own it, baby. I love it.
They also go to visit the local village priest, who I guess also acts as the historian. He's a bit new there, so he doesn't know all the history that well. But he does recall that the old owners of the manor at some point tried to have an exorcism before World War II. And he's like, he promises he'll look into it and get back to us later in the movie with more details. But if you're interested in hearing about it before you leave, he has an interesting theory about how pollution is the modern day manifestation of sin.
I mean, he probably has a point.
Guy had a lot to say.
It was very weird. I was like, is this going to tie into the movie at all? I'm like, no. They just wanted to drop this weird idea on us.
Is that the only time, too, where we see where the movie takes place outside of that manor?
That is pretty much the only time they leave the manor, yes. This brief jaunt into town.
There's one scene at the end, but the majority is all in that manor.
Yes, absolutely. Anyway, they return to the manor, and Collinson, who's been like setting up the research lab, tells them he does in fact have records of an exorcism taking place there in the legal documents related to the purchase. Apparently, a maid died in that room in 1892, and he has a full record of the haunting. Like, people took notes on it. There's a record of the haunting. And he finally admits, he's like, I'll be honest, I've heard screaming in that room. I also think it's haunted. And so now that a man has said it, Peter believes it's haunted.
So, oh yeah, well, that's one thing. But also, he presents the death information on the tiniest piece of paper. and then Brock reads it, and I'm like, there's no way all of that writing is on that tiny... It's like half of a Post-it note. He had a whole file. Like, why not just give him a letter-sized piece of paper? That would have made it more...
It just says ghost yes on it. But yeah, now Peter's a little more interested. He's like, oh, you're telling me you've also heard a ghost? Jill, why didn't you say so? They go to the room to check it out, and... of course, when Peter gets in there, he also now hears footsteps. He hears the ghost screaming. It drives him out of the room. So he experiences the haunting as well, which gets him really excited. He's going to shift all of the work they're going to do. He's got a huge research team. They're shifting it all into investigating this haunting. And he's just like, who knows what we'll get out of this? Maybe we'll get some crazy technological breakthrough. We just need to get in there and discover what's going on.
This was a weird thing, though, right? Like, because I thought at one point, I was like, so they're all there to work on stuff. Can you imagine the manager's just like, all right, everyone. We're just changing gears. We're going to do this other thing. Maybe this is how we find new technologies. It's like, is it? Is this the best use of their time?
I mean, his whole thing is he's experimental research. There are pure research, he calls it. The idea being that, like, they can work on whatever they want in the hopes they accidentally stumble across something useful. I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but he does say in the sort of setup that they're there to do a new recording medium. And he's just like, let's shift to this. This is really interesting. No one's ever, like, investigated technologically a haunting before, and we have all the tech. And when they get in there, they, it takes place over a long period of the movie. I'm going to kind of summarize a lot of it, but they discover that, like, people have different sensitivities to ghosts. Jill being at the high end, she can see it, she can really experience it. And they have one tech at the low end who never hears anything. Even when he's in there with other people and there's a haunting happening, he can never experience it. They start bringing in townsfolk to come in, and the townsfolk talk about how since they were kids, they used to go in there on dares and kind of like stand in the room to get spooked out. One guy talks about a friend of his who went in there and got locked in, and he went so insane they had to give him a lobotomy to fix his brain.
Yeah, although I'll say on that, I thought that was actually a really well done scene, because he basically, the guy who they met in the bar, he says he had used to go through the house all the time and break windows and stuff. They're like, did you used to go to this room? He's like, yeah, I did. I used to hear rats and stuff in here. And that's when Peter knows that he's lying, because he's like, there was like food rations left here. If there was rats, they would have eat them. So it's confirming that not only is he lying, but that there's something specific about this room, and that it has been whatever weird, mysterious thing that they're experiencing has been experienced for to multiple people over multiple generations. So it's confirming that there's something special about the room. I thought that was a pretty good scene.
I did think that there was some like interesting ideas here, and I think what Luke was like narrowing it down much better than the movie did, but because it was very clunky about what exactly their goal was. But I think the Coles notes of it is just like, if we can record a way to have audio or whatever of a paranormal activity, so to speak, then we will be way ahead of everybody else in the science game. So I think that's the reason that they shift all of their focus. But I also thought the interesting thing was that this movie did was that everybody experienced it differently.
Yeah.
I really did. I liked that a lot. And because there was a couple of the minor scientist characters that could also see it. And then Collie, the sounds of her screams were way more intense for him than others as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept for sure. I wish they'd played with it a little bit more. I would have liked to know more. They imply that they're going to try to experiment on the guy who gets no activity from it, but we never see them actually do it. I would have liked to know more about what happened there. It felt like there were some opportunities that didn't fully develop, but cool ideas.
Yeah, and it does feel like it's one of those like it had those elements of like an old, one of these old movies where everyone goes into a haunted mansion for the weekend and they all see stuff and they're like, what did you see? I saw this. What did you see? There was like, I think you're right, Luke. I think they could have played with it a little bit more because to Billy's point, it was interesting to see different people react in different ways to the same information. And what I liked was, instead of them having that annoying thing in movies where they can keep that running because people just don't say what they've seen. They see something in the room, they come out like, do you see anything? They're like, no. It's like everyone just says like, hey, I just saw a ghost. Did you see it? The other person's like, I saw it. And someone else goes, no, I didn't. And so I like the way that they're bouncing information off each other, knowing that they are each getting a piece and maybe they can figure out what this puzzle is.
Yeah, exactly. And as you were saying, Billy, like part of it is they can't record the screams on magnetic tape. They can't like catch it. They can only hear them. So they start like theorizing that what's happening is something's been recorded on the stones in the room that is transmitted into people's minds. It's this new, they've discovered some sort of new recording medium that is able to absorb information. In this case, like probably heavy emotions, they figure, but that's still a new recording medium. And they're on to something. This is something new, something exciting. It's what Pure Research is all about. They immediately throw a rager of a party, which was pure hubris. They're just like, we did it. We discovered a new medium. They're having a huge party. Peter's like actively groping Jill at the party. Like he literally at some point reaches up and like grabs her breasts in the middle of the party. I couldn't believe it. And then Peter goes and he drunkenly calls his boss Ryan on the phone and says, I've got it. I've got the big one. I promise you I'm going to change the world. I was just like, pure hubris. You've barely figured out what this is.
Although the only thing I'll say about the essential sexual assault that happened on poor Jill is that, and I know I shouldn't laugh at it, but what made me laugh was the guy essentially was doing, because he's an audio guy, because that's what all these guys are, and he did like a radio thing. He was like, channel 1, channel 2, beep boop, and on her breast. And just because it's so inappropriate, but because he's like an audio guy, I was like, I guess that makes sense. But anyways, not that it's an excuse, it's bad, but it made me laugh.
There were two things about this party scene. One, this was racist bit number 3, where the guy who can't hear anything did the slanty eyes, and he also had like a piece of white paper to like impersonate a Japanese person, like the stereotypical way of doing it. Yeah. And the other thing that drove me nuts about this scene is when Brock is on the phone with his boss. It's like, I don't know who did the sound mixing in this, but you made the party way too loud. And I was just waiting for him to like yell at them to shut up, because I was yelling at them to shut up because I was trying to hear what the hell he was saying to him. Also, his boss seemed to turn around really quickly on that. He was like, nah, we're shutting you down. And then he's like, no, but we got it. The big one. It's like, yeah, it's the big one. Okay, everything's great. But yeah, they did celebrate prematurely
I'm on the boss's side. He calls and goes, hey, we've created an amazing new technology. We've done it. It's here tonight. The guy's like, all right, great. What is it? He's like, I don't have it yet. He's like, all right, man, forget this. We're going another direction. I'm sick of these calls.
But this is when the like research changed a little bit. Up till now, we've sort of seen some vague stuff they're doing, and now they're like, how do we trigger the ghost to appear? Because it only appears at random. They have all the data of kind of approximately when it appears, but they don't know what triggers it. So they start using lasers and a comically large megaphone to attempt to cause the ghost to appear.
It was great. It was like a mega cannon.
The thing was huge. It was humongous, and he's just like, if you did not know what they were doing and you walked into that room just to witness that scene, I'd be like, oh my goodness, maybe we should just board this up and leave them in there.
That megaphone is also emitting the most annoying sound I've ever heard.
Yeah.
That was the thing. It was like the sound in this was like really grating. Like the looping screams of the ghost, I found like just like nails on a chalkboard. And that scene particularly, like I felt for the guys that were like all covering their ears and stuff. I was like, yeah, fucking sucks.
It is funny because, you know, often in a horror movie, you'll use discordant or like upsetting sounds to like scare the audience. This wasn't scary sounds. It was just like very annoying sounds.
Yeah, hands down.
But you're right. What has happened is basically Peter has promised the world to his boss. So he's really pushing the team to figure out what's happening. And he's like forcing them to an all-nighter. He wants to figure out what's happened like the night after the party, basically. They're using these annoying sounds. Everyone's clearly exhausted. It's not working at all. And he keeps pushing them harder and harder until he finally like grabs a giant annoying megaphone and turns it up to the maximum, trying to get the ghost to like appear due to vibrations. And he ends up erasing the stone tape. They're, like Jill's just like, it's gone. I can't feel it anymore. And everyone's like, great work, boss. You just erased the tape. Fantastic work. And it's such a funny scene where everyone's just like, thanks for fucking us, boss.
I also thought it was funny because I think in that scene too, like once they stop, like and they're like, we can't take it anymore. What's the point? Blah, blah, blah. Then you hear the sounds of her running up the stairs and Brock gets so pissed. He's like, I didn't call you. Because he was like, fuck, it didn't work. Like, you're not supposed to come now. You're supposed to respond to all this bullshit that I'm doing.
Yeah, my lasers are supposed to bring you.
Yeah, I don't know what the lasers were doing. But also watching that 3D graph of the room on that monitor as it's flicking about, that drove me nuts too.
The 70s tech is very funny. But for a movie like this, I thought the turn that they erased the ghost was very funny. I never saw it coming. I was like, what a good turn on this movie to have like erased. Somehow you've erased the ghost. I was just like, we still got more movie to go, but you've done it already.
Yeah, they unintentionally did an exorcism.
And this, of course, puts Peter in a rough spot. He has to immediately get on the phone with his boss and like start backtracking on the thing he promised. He's like on the phone with his boss. He's like, oh yeah, that thing I told you about earlier. Yeah, no, I was talking about something else, and it's not that exciting.
Yeah. Which brings in Billy's favorite character eventually.
It's true.
Oh my god. Okay, so the first time that we see, what was his name? I never got his name.
Crenshaw.
So the first time Crenshaw is introduced to us, I did think that it was one of the guys from Monty Python. Because he's like this bumbling fool. And he's got red hands, and I couldn't understand why his hands were red. I missed it. And I guess it's just because of washing machine technology. But I love that he's such a smarmy motherfucker, and I really wanted more of him.
Well, Crenshaw, the thing here is because Peter has lost face, he's been trying to keep the research facility to himself, but Crenshaw's been in the wings, in the boss's ear, trying to get his own research in there because he's trying to develop an electronic washing machine that can sort by color, can figure out what kind of stains you have, and like take care of them for you. Why his hands, and every time you see him, his hands are dyed a different color, is because he personally dyes the fabrics that he puts into the washing machine. So he's constantly dyeing his hands the wrong color. And when Peter messes up the ghost, he has to backtrack. He has to pretend like he never was investigating a ghost because it sounds too insane. So Crenshaw gets his opportunity to come in. Peter's lost face. They're moving the electronic washing machines in, and they're having to like cover up the fact that they wasted all this time researching a ghost. So Peter's basically has his whole team destroying all evidence of the research they've done up till now, just attempt to like save his job, basically.
A lot of shredding.
It's so wasteful. And it's like we watched it feels wasteful more so for us, the audience, because at this point it's like we invested so much time hoping that this ragtag team of like scientists are gonna come up with something, only for Brock to come and be like, nah, fuck it. And then it's like, well, now I'm rooting for the washing machine guy.
But you're right. Because they've given up on this research, or Peter himself just refuses to acknowledge it anymore, Jill is sort of forced to look into it on her own. Because, you know, she never really thought of it as a recording medium. She's been worried about the woman who had died there. And is she, like, actually a spirit trap there? Is just like an impression of her? And at some point during research, the printer they had in the room started printing out words instead of just information. It started saying, like, pray, soul, save. So she's still sort of hung up on, like, what happened to this woman? And it doesn't really add up to her because she's like, if you fell off that very short set of stairs, you wouldn't die. So there must have been more going on. And that's when she kind of remembers that some of the people in town implied that there might have been other ghosts in the room. So she goes back in to the room to sort of look around and be like, if the ghost is gone, is there more to this room? And she starts hearing more like scary sounds. They're worse than before, but no one else can hear them. In fact, I believe cause her to have some sort of fainting spell. So she knows there's something worse in that room.
Yeah, and is this around the time that the vicar comes back into play?
Exactly.
He shows up. Now, let me tell you, this guy fucks. Because he was riding on his little motorcycle, and he had his goggles and his little hat on. I was like, that's the most stylish-looking vicar I've ever seen. Considering he was such a bumbling idiot in the first scene that we saw. Now, seeing him come in, I was like, who's this cool fellow right here?
I have to ask you then, Billy, because I've seen another priest who deals with exorcisms who also rides a moped with a little goggles and a little helmet.
I know exactly who you're talking about. You're talking about Russell Crowe, right?
I am talking about Italian Russell Crowe.
You know what? I loved that movie. It was very
It's good.
If
it's
only
a fun
for
movie.
his little accent in it is just endearing.
Jordan loves that movie too, right?
What movie is that?
The Pope's Exorcist.
Oh, I didn't watch that.
But then he also did another... I know we're going off, sorry. But then, like, the next year, he did another exorcism movie, but it's not a sequel to that. It's a completely different movie with a completely different plotline and a different character. So Russell Crowe did back-to-back exorcism movies that do not tie together.
I've seen them both.
I fell asleep in the second one.
Anyway, we'll get back to the plot here. The local priest returns. He's like, hey, I looked into that exorcism for you, and I found information. And Peter's like, I don't care anymore. We're not doing ghosts anymore. And he's like, no, but the exorcism, it was actually in 1760. So there was 2 exorcisms, and neither of them worked. And the original one was before the house was built on the sites of this rune. So, like, it predates the maid ghost. It predates the building. The idea that, like, there's something much more cursed on this land that the manor was built on. Mm-hmm. And Jill uses that information to deduce that the stone, or the stone tape, if you will, isn't really like a magnetic tape. It's more like a memory core. So that Peter has erased the most recent recording, but there are, like, deeper, more ancient recordings within the stone that have been decaying. And then I don't quite know how she gets there, but she theorizes that Peter's attempts to trigger the ghost have only amplified the old shapeless things that are present in the stone. And apparently Jill's the only one sensitive enough currently to, like, interpret them or feel them being there.
Well, at the beginning of the movie, Brock touched her head to imply that she has a brain. So clearly she's very smart.
That is true. He does do that. He's like, look, I know you're, what do we call them now? Women. And you have, I guess, something going for you in your body, but you do also have a brain. He, like, taps on her head. He's like, he could not be more patronizing. It's pretty hilarious.
Their only computer programmer, and he just talks down to her constantly. But because Peter is too busy fighting for his corporate life, he will not hear about Jill. In fact, he's moved on from her so much that he's now sleeping with his secretary. Like, he's now broken up with her without telling her, started a new affair.
Oh, is she the one that he yells at? Aren't you gonna make some
Yes.
coffee or something?
Yeah, it's like that.
I thought that
was
was
the thing.
great.
He yelled at her. He's like having a fight with Jill, and then the secretary comes. He's like, "And you, make me a cup of tea." And then she's like, "Oh," and she like goes off, and she comes back with tea. And the next time you see her, she slept with him. I was like, "Girl, get some self-worth."
And Jill is put on leave, essentially. He doesn't want to hear about this anymore. He doesn't want this to come up. He doesn't want Crenshaw to find out. His job's at stake. But of course, Jill can't let it go. She stays late, and she's still trying to figure out what's going on, what's all happening. And she goes back to the stone room and somehow triggers these more terrifying spirits, which appear as sort of like psychedelic orbs and like kind of spooky blobs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an odd TV effect.
I guess work with what you got.
Exactly.
It wasn't a great effect. I mean, that's the thing. This thing clearly is playing on like a mood and like a vibe for the whole thing. So special effects, or like, it's not a special effects extravaganza, right? Like it's not this big budget sort of thing. However, when they sort of like really needed it to work, which I think this sort of escalation of these, you know, demonic or evil sort of spectral orbs, it would be nice if there was maybe something that was going on, as opposed to like, I'm like, oh, they're kind of blue.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was a missed opportunity to have, like, I know he erased it, but even if that undermaid came back and was kind of approaching her while she was going up the steps, while those orbs and stuff were happening, I think that would have been a bit more effective. But I also think that the actress who played Jill really carries it. Like, her reactions are quite good, and it sells the horror of that situation, even though for us as the audience, it's just like, it just looks like you're in a rave and you don't want to be there.
That's a very good explanation. Yeah, essentially this menaces her in the room. It kind of chases her up those stone stairs that don't go anywhere. She climbs onto a stone pillar next to the stairs, and the menacing orbs cause her to fall backwards. And what we as the audience see is she falls into like a black abyss that has no end. We just see her falling forever, her screaming everywhere. And then we cut away. Crenshaw's having a fight with Peter about how he's treating Jill, about this whole ghost thing. And they come running when they hear the screaming. And when they get in there, they find Jill dead beside the staircase. Just like the maid fell, Jill has now been killed in that room as well.
Yeah. Big move to kill off your seemingly hero character in that fashion. You know, you would see that more nowadays, but I think it speaks to a good storytelling point where it's just like, you think your protagonist is going to make it out of it, but then she doesn't, and your sympathetic character is now dead.
It's true. And we cut to a few days later, and an inquest has gone into Jill's death. It's been ruled an accident, but largely ruled that way because Peter made her out to be some sort of mentally unstable employee, left out all the stuff he was doing, left out the ghost research. And he basically is like, orders his team, he's like, go into Jill's office, destroy everything she did about this. And they're like, but some of her records say that like the recordings seem to be as old as 7,000 years. And he's like, I don't care. I want it gone. And his team's basically turning on him. They hate how detestably he's treating Jill's legacy, that he like made it seem like she was crazy at the inquest. And in fact, it gets so bad that I believe Collinson backhand slaps him at some point.
I thought he throat punched him.
He throat punched him.
Was that it?
He fell into
Yeah.
the shredded paper, and when he came up and the security guard's helping him, he's like holding his throat. Also, I love that that collie just throat punched him and then immediately got out. He was just like, I'm gone. I was like, oh, do you think because if Brock got up, he could probably take you? Like, he just like, it was like one cheap shot, then it got get out.
But it's especially showing that Peter, everything's sort of falling apart for Peter. This is made worse by the security guard after he helps him up. Is like, oh, by the way, the conservationists came by. I guess they heard about the runes at the inquest, and you're going to be in some trouble for hiding it from them. And they're going to close down your site for a bit to like start looking into like these like historical runes. And essentially, we're seeing that his career is basically collapsing. Crenshaw has won. He's lost his face within Ryan Electronics. And he's sort of distraught, and he sort of wanders through the research lab back to the stone room, where he sits down in the room and he starts hearing Jill screaming and calling out to him for help. And I guess we're supposed to think it's maybe driving him mad, I guess is sort of the end of it.
Yeah, I liked the ambiguous ending. I liked I guess she did have to die for them to be like, okay, now she's imprinted. She's the new Stone Tape. I don't know if that was good enough punishment for him because he was such a dick.
Well, I think it's supposed to be, it's his conscience, right? It's like she's forever stuck in this place. Her soul, can never find peace. And now he is in a way also in that state, even if it's in a human form. Even though he's alive, he's constantly going to be trapped with this idea of what he's done and the repercussions of it. That's how I took it. So it's like they're both going to be caught in a prism of some way, but he's in a cage of his own doing.
It is funny that they always, like, even, like, going way back to, like, the beginning of the movie, like, I think Luke mentioned this, it was just, like, once Collie told Brock, yeah, I heard it too, and Brock's like, oh, okay, and then Brock hears it, and then he's like, alright, guys, we got a ghost. And then everybody just kind of accepts it. There's a little bit of pushback, but for the big part of it, the entire team is like, all right, let's get it. And it's interesting that he doesn't once, because he's so obsessed with where his standing is within the company, it's not like he goes against that, his belief that it exists. It's just that it's no longer useful to him.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. I like that theoretically as a concept, but within the context of like a horror movie, it does feel like a low stakes punishment for him that he kind of loses his place in the company. He's got this guilt he carries with him over Jill's death. But he was such a scumbag for most of the movie that you kind of wanted more of like the whole team, it felt like you could have done more with, because they're all like boys being boys, bad behavior throughout the movie. It felt like a few more people could get punished, or like in a horror movie you want to see a few more people get like riled up, but the only person punished really in the entire movie is ultimately Jill.
Yeah, it's so sad.
You make a good point, Luke, and I think that's maybe this movie's greatest flaw is there's a little bit of a problem of escalation. So I think that's maybe why the end doesn't have the impact that they're kind of hoping for, because you almost want it to get bigger and bigger as it goes. Even the sort of final reveal of these evil spirits, it was a little muted, and everything in the movie sort of is. And I think part of it is just the time period, and part of it is the type of horror thriller kind of movie they're making. But because there's not a lot of, like, you don't really feel this momentum. You don't feel this escalation of, oh no, this happens, and no, this is getting worse, and this is getting worse, or even Peter's reactions are getting more and more extreme. Everything's so subtle that at the end you go, huh, I guess he got his comeuppance, as opposed to something maybe grander because it had escalated to such a large degree.
Yeah, it's weird because this is a TV movie. I'm trying to give it a little bit more lenience and flexibility in what it was. Maybe or I don't know what censorship. If this was before the what was the censorship thing with the UK when they had all those underground.
Oh, the video nasties. That would be
video
before.
Nasties. I don't know
before video nasties, because that's the
okay.
80s,
So this is so this is before the video nasties, and I'm wondering if this was my note. This feels like a 70s equivalent of a shitty Blumhouse film where nobody dies. And like Jill dies at the end, sure, but if looking at it in just a horror lens, they had a perfect opportunity when they brought that bar guy in, and then he was struggling, and they even showed that he was bleeding because he was just falling over himself while he was running out of the room. I was like, make the apparition kill him, like put some stakes in here, and it didn't feel like a horror movie to me. That makes sense.
I think you're not wrong. The escalation I think for me a sign of the times, maybe it being it for TV, but like they spent so much time with the maid ghost, who is not a threatening ghost, and then they reveal there's something worse underneath, but they spend the least amount of time with the thing that's, you think like in a movie about technology gone awry, or people trying to exploit like something natural for their own like profit. Like it's about capitalism, it's about exploiting something supernatural. Usually you push it so far and you make a mistake and that thing gets out of control. It's Jurassic Park. It gets out of control and starts eating everybody. We never get there. Like Jill just dies. Your one hero who like figured this all out dies. And then it just kind of goes back to status quo. It's like, oh, now we just have another ghost in this room and no one cares.
Are you saying she's Nedry?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying she is Dennis Nedry from Jurassic Park.
Nedry was funnier though.
That's true.
She was not funny at all.
It's interesting though. Interesting movie. I still kind of enjoyed watching it. So let's get into maybe ratings then. I guess I think we've talked about it for quite a bit of time. Billy, I know you know how this works. Do you wanna come in with a score out of 10 and maybe your thoughts behind why you're choosing that?
I would give this. It's really hard to when you watch these old movies because I can't help but look at it through a lens of today. But I think the reason that I didn't have as many notes on this as I did for like The Wasp Woman is because I was actually kind of engaged in what was on the screen and I was actually watching and taking it all in. I had my issues with it, but I would probably I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10.
6 out of 10. All right.
And only, you know what? It would have inched it up a couple notches if one other fucking person died in the goddamn movie.
Jordan, what do you think?
I feel pretty similar. I think we've sort of talked about the reasons. It's like, I think Billy's right. I think it's engaging and it's kind of interesting. It's like, it's a little bit slow. Obviously, the filmmaking is a little bit different and there's some budgetary limitations. So it's not perfect by any means. And I think they get close to what I think they're going for, but ultimately it's like it's not quite there. I'm going to give it a 6.5. I think it's just missing its mark.
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with you guys. I think we both saw the movie the same way. We both seen kind of what was interesting and where it didn't work. I'm going to say though it did check a bunch of boxes for me for things I like to watch in a movie. Like I like the take on ghosts. I like the scientist take on it. Like those elements I find very interesting. So I'm going to nudge it up slightly. I'm going to give it a 7. But that's, I think, a personal score. Like I think it checked a lot of boxes for things I find interesting in a horror movie, like this kind of take on a ghost thing. I think, 6.56 is also pretty accurate. But for me personally, it checked a lot of boxes in kind of a genre I like.
Yeah, I think the reason I'm giving it a 6 instead of a 4 is, Luke, because of what you said. Like, there's a lot of interesting ideas in this, but a lot of those interesting ideas get kind of just a passing fancy, and then it's just kind of out the window, and they never come back to it. And I would have, if it explored those, but I mean, Jordan had a point too. It's a TV movie. It's probably budgetary reasons and all that they couldn't really go full into maybe what the intention was.
I also wonder too, like, I don't know, I couldn't tell you historically what's happening around this time. The idea of scientists investigating a phenomenon and putting like a real specific point on it and then finding like, it feels like this might have been like pretty fresh ground too. So maybe now we're used to seeing kind of like these sort of things. I don't know. So maybe the blueprint hadn't been built yet. So it was kind of like a bit of a meandering because like, how do you escalate like a science ghost thing? I don't know. I mean, I could be wrong, but it was interesting.
I thought the acting was quite good too, especially with I thought Jane Asher, I didn't come around on her at first just because I was like, oh man, this Jill is such a fucking wet blanket. I'm not going to get on her side at all. But after about 40 minutes in, I was like, okay, now I'm
she was the standout.
Actively rooting for her.
Yeah.
And also I really liked Collie. I liked that character as well.
Here's a little piece of trivia I read that made sense after I watched it, but like the writer had ended up going to some BBC research facility where they were researching tech, and when he got there, he was surprised to find that all the men who worked there were like, it was very boyish. They were all goofing around. They were all like kind of working whatever they wanted it, like, which I think is true. We see it a lot more now when we see people in like the tech industry. We have an understanding of this boys club where you're goofing around, just trying to find things. But he had never experienced that before. And I thought he did a good translation because when you watch it, you're just like, oh, I know I know what this business is. I know who these characters are. And I thought he did a good translation of like, he went there one time and saw it and he's just like, oh, weird. I just assumed you'd all be stuffed shirts who just like are working on science, but you kind of end up in this weird little boys club instead.
I also I looked up Jane Asher afterwards because I was like, she looks familiar. And I don't remember her in it, but I love this movie called Death at a Funeral that she is in, apparently. But also she's still working. She's doing like voiceover work for, I guess, some podcasts like Doctor Who type stuff, and also on her IMDb page, I thought this was worth noting. There's a lot of pictures of her and Paul McCartney.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they dated.
Because of this movie.
Yeah, because he's like, I gots to meet this lady.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you for joining us, Billy. It's been great. It's fun having you on again.
Thank you very much for having me. It was great.
Listener, you can, of course, email us at continuumdrag@gmail.com if you have any thoughts on the Stone Tape. And on Instagram, X, and Facebook, we're going to have clips from the Stone Tape. There's not a ton of special effects stuff, but there's some, like, probably some goofy stuff we'll put up, like that alien climbing out of the back of that car.
Yeah. that had nothing to do with the movie.
Absolutely not. And that about wraps it up. So happy Halloween, listener. And Jordan, I'll see you on the next record.
See you then.
Can't get enough Continuum Drag? Commission a bonus episode for charity.
Want us to watch an episode we missed after using the escape pod or during a best of run? No problem.
Is there an episode of a series we've never watched or a TV movie you want us to cover? You got it.
Wish we'd comment on your favorite movie, content, or other weird media? Sure, why not?
All you have to do is make a donation to one of the charities selected by past guests on our website.
We suggest a donation of $50 per television hour of content we're watching, but everyone's means are different, so give what you can.
Get all the details about bonus episodes for charity on our website, continuumdrag.podbean.com, or follow the links in our social media profiles.
Continuum Drag is recorded in Ontario, Canada, and Seoul, South Korea. Theme music by James Rick Seidler. Produced by Jordan Dullock and Luke Black. Special thanks to Aaron Hughes.